Dubik, and this is Forum Daily for Friday, January 23rd. Prime Minister Mark Carney's call at the World Economic Forum for middle powers to band together against economic coercion by great powers is winning some cross-partisan support at home and garnering attention all over the world. The speech, which the Prime Minister's office said Carney wrote himself, painted a grim picture of a world where global powers are increasingly using economic dominance for political coercion, and where countries like Canada cannot continue to pretend the way things used to be is the way that they will ever be again.
We knew the story of the international rules-based order was partially false, that the strongest would exempt themselves when convenient, that trade rules were enforced asymmetrically. And we knew that international law applied with varying rigor depending on the identity of the accused or the victim. This fiction was useful, and American hegemony in particular helped provide public goods, open sea lanes, a stable financial system, collective security, and support for frameworks for resolving disputes. So we placed the sign in the window. We participated in the rituals, and we largely avoided calling out the gaps between rhetoric and reality. This bargain no longer works. Let me be direct. We are in the midst of a rupture, not a transition. Over the past 2 decades, a series of crises in finance, health, energy, and geopolitics have laid bare the risks of extreme global integration. But more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons. Tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. You cannot live within the lie of mutual benefit through integration when integration becomes the source of your subordination.
Now, Carney's speech never mentioned the United States or President Donald Trump by name, but it was clear that Trump's tariff-backed global economic shakeup was the target of Carney's comments about the use of tariffs as leverage. And during President Trump's speech, he made a direct comment to Mark Carney.
We're building a golden dome that's going to, just by its very nature, going to be defending Canada. Canada gets a lot of freebies from us. By the way, they should be grateful also, but they're not. I watched your Prime Minister yesterday. He wasn't so grateful. But they should be grateful to us. Canada lives because of the United States. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. What we did for Israel was amazing, but that's nothing compared to what we have planned for the United States, Canada, and the rest of the world. We are going to build a dome.
I'm now joined by our contributor, David Clement, to unpack this further. Now, David, how significant is it that Prime Minister Mark Carney chose Davos and a global audience to have such a blunt speech directed to Donald Trump?
I mean, it was definitely a statement. That's probably the best venue he's going to get outside of maybe addressing the UN. Mm-hmm. And what makes it significant, because it's Davos, is it's not just politicians. It's also business leaders, finance executives. It's kind of the who's who of the upper echelon of decision makers. And so that's certainly a choice, and a choice to make a statement like that. It is puzzling, though, because the speech has been very well received here in terms of the tension between Canada and the United States. But I'm hard-pressed to see a scenario where everything he just said about great powers using economic coercion and the rules-based order falling apart and all of those things, that would also certainly apply to China. Mm-hmm. And that is a country whom every indication, at least so far, we are trying to better our relationship with. And where the tension is here is the idea, which is later in the speech, where he says, we're going to take the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. It's a pretty profound statement. It's essentially, my translation of it is, we're going to do what we need to do, and we'll turn a blind eye to the things we maybe otherwise wouldn't. Mm-hmm. If we're looking at China, that would include things like ignoring our grievances about Hong Kong, the Uyghurs, human rights, maybe election interference, who knows? And so that is a very difficult thing to juggle, because in my view, we're going to turn a blind eye to grievances we otherwise may have, if it's going to apply to China in various instances, one could make the same argument to just bite our tongue and apply it to the United States, given the significance of that relationship historically.
Well, and I think a big takeaway from Carney's speech was that Canada and other countries have really taken the wait and see approach with Donald Trump and with the United States. And I think Carney's speech was him basically saying that we're not going to wait and see anymore. We're going to reach out, we're going to network, we're going to
Mhm.
band together and not really rely on the United States anymore because it's just so unpredictable.
Yeah, and that is something that I can understand in a vacuum without ignoring what that means in the kind of total
Right.
view of it. Because if it means middle powers turning to China, the list of grievances would be 10 times longer
Mhm.
in regards to China. Well, I mean, we're literally talking about we, we're talking about a government that was responsible for trying to interfere in our elections. We had a national inquiry on exactly this. And so I can understand that we're going to try and kind of open and shop around and diversify. That all makes sense. But if it's a pivot to authoritarian regimes, that's a major shift in any type of values-based foreign policy from Canada, certainly a major shift from both the Harper era and the Trudeau era. But what I really struggle with here is that all of this could change
Mhm.
in a matter of months.
Right.
And what I mean here is that if the Democrats retake Congress and potentially the Senate, they will have stripped the president of his tariff power. And so all of the trade grievances and back and forth we have with the administration, in theory, could be gone by November. So it's a very strong statement to make, given that we still have a runway
Mhm.
for the tariff power of the president to be withdrawn, because the president doesn't historically have the power to just unilaterally do these things. And even if the Democrats don't take it, it's still an open question on who wins the next presidential election. And so are we potentially souring the great historical relationship we've had with the United States? Yes, because Trump has been erratic and problematic. But are we sacrificing the totality of that relationship moving forward forever, regardless of whether or not it changes in November or changes in the next presidential election?
Well, and again, I think a lot of countries right now are just nervous to take that wait and see and
Mhm.
the if. But for the second time this week, Prime Minister Mark Carney took aim at Donald Trump, this time directly biting back at the US president's Canada lives because of the United States comment. At the end of a nearly 30-minute speech in Quebec City on Thursday, kicking off the Liberal cabinet meeting, Carney addressed the president's comments.
When we live our values, we grow as individuals and we build as a people. When we're kind, kindness grows. When we're united, unity grows. When we're Canadian, inclusive, fair, ambitious, Canada grows. Canada and the United States have built a remarkable partnership in the economy, in security, and in rich cultural exchange. But Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian.
Now, David, this is the second time that Mark Carney has directly called out President Donald Trump. What do you take about the tone this second time around?
Well, I think it's important to understand that the kind of stronger message on Trump, regardless of its merits, regardless of its strategy and negotiations, whether it hurts us or helps us with the USMCA, it does help Mark Carney domestically.
Mhm.
You see his poll numbers go up. It looks, although the polls are relatively tight, the way the vote shakes out, if a vote were to happen now, they would probably have a majority government. So there is a domestic political angle at play here where this is benefiting Carney and the Liberals to have a tougher stance on Trump. Now, the question for Canadians is how comfortable are we with the balance between something for domestic political gain, which could make are economic issues more difficult, specifically with the USMCA? That's still an open question. I don't know the answer to it, but it does make me a little uneasy. Again, we go back to the world as it is rather than how we want it to be. Well, all of those arguments and that principle could be very much applied to Trump. He could simply just bite his tongue and not do the shenanigans in the back and forth. And he did it before in the Oval Office, so it's possible. And so that's what we're wrestling with here.
Well, David, we do just have to go to break, but after the break, we will discuss international and global reaction to Mark Carney's speech. We'll be right back after these messages. Stay tuned. Mark Carney's speech in Davos is gaining international traction. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum called the speech in tune with current times. And California Governor Gavin Newsom said that Carney's remarks captured a growing international consensus that global power dynamics are shifting.
So am I surprised by what Carney did? Quite the contrary. I thought it was, I had more leaders from the United States quietly, not publicly, not us standing up publicly, the transcript of that speech saying, wow. They were, got in Trump's head yesterday. He brought it up. You know everything about Trump because it's what's not in the teleprompter. That tells you everything you need to know about where Trump's head is on things. It was incredibly effective. The markets were more effective. Markets. It's not Mother Nature. Thought of most powerful force on earth with Mother Nature, but it's the markets, particularly the Trump administration. Combine that with the comments of Macron, combine that with the EU commissioner, but the clarity that came from Prime Minister of Canada. But the fact that he went to China, came back with a deal, started introducing low-cost, high-quality electric vehicles, not made in Michigan, Detroit, but overseas into Canada. It says everything you know about the recklessness of America's foreign policy. Everything you need to know. You know it intimately, but it's a remarkable thing to break down 80-plus years of alliances. It takes decades and decades to build trust in organizations, the architecture of that. It takes weeks, tweets, hours, minutes sometimes to destroy it. Destruction is not strength. The Trump administration is weakness masquerading as strength. And people need to understand that. That's reflected in the tweets. That's reflected in canceling people. That's reflected in sending masked men into the American cities. It's reflected at this moment. So I respect what Carney did.
But not all the traction around Carney's speech has been positive. U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick called Prime Minister Mark Carney's speech at the World Economic Forum political noise on Thursday and criticized Canada's recent deal with China.
My view is, right, that Canada has never expressed to the world that they have the best deal, the second best deal in the world. The best deal in the world is Mexico, because remember, they have USMCA, which means 85% of the Canadian economy comes into the United States for zero. And there he is complaining that he's going to go to China and improve it. What's he going to do? China's delighted to sell to him. But do you think China's going to open their economy to accept exports from Canada? This is the silliest thing I've ever seen. They have the second best deal because Mexico's got a little better deal. They have 25% on the extra 15%, whereas Canada's got 35% on the extra 15%. But give me a break. They have the second best deal in the world. And all I got to do is listen to this guy whine and complain.
I'm joined again by our contributor, David Clement, to break this down further. Now, David, we're seeing leaders beyond Canada respond to Carney's speech in Davos. Mexico's president and California's governor are publicly praising his message. What do you take from that?
Well, it's useful for politicians on the center left, which both Sheinbaum and Newsom are. You also have to factor in that it is widely considered that Gavin Newsom wants to be at the top of the Democratic ticket next time around. That's why the governor of a state is in Davos talking to. He's capitalizing on the same thing Mark Carney is capitalizing in terms of who's there. So I don't think the reaction is particularly surprising. I think the reason why we're seeing more positive international reaction to it is it's almost like a first mover problem, right? Who is going to be the first world leader to push back and call Trump out for the shenanigans? And now maybe that affords others, not so much Gavin Newsom, because It's his job to do that.
Right.
But somebody like Sheinbaum, Lutnick mentioned they have the best deal, et cetera. But this gives her a little bit more cover to push back, maybe with a more aggressive tone or change the way, because a lot of the interactions with Trump, we've seen this in the Oval Office, regardless of where they're from. It's almost like show up, kiss the ring, praise the guy, then he loves you, and then maybe we can get closer to a better deal. We could see a shift in that where world leaders maybe don't take that approach because Carney has kind of been the first mover. He's like the first one out of the trench. And so I think that's why we're seeing such a positive response from various world leaders, is because it now gives them the cover to potentially put their foot down on some of the issues that are going back and forth.
And is this kind of international validation unusual for a Canadian prime minister?
I mean, not really. Not really. We've seen this with Trudeau when he was first elected, where kind of global media and various politicians fawned over him. Canadians have a great reputation internationally. And so I think the speech capitalizes on the existing reputation we have while adding some of that political cover. So it's not that out of the ordinary. I think the reason why it's elevated so much in terms of the attention and the positive attention is that we're the country who has the most to lose when it comes to the U.S. being an erratic trade partner. And so it means more when we say something. You could have, let's say, the Prime Minister of Australia say the exact same thing. It wouldn't carry as much weight because they're way off in the bottom of the world across the Pacific.
Right.
And their trade relationship with the United States, which is great, is not the same. We share one of the longest unarmed borders in the world between any two countries, the greatest trading relationship historically between any two countries. So it just means more that it's coming from us.
Now, Sheinbaum called Carney's speech in tune with the times. What exactly about the speech do you think is really resonating with certain world leaders?
Well, I think it's saying publicly that things aren't the way they used to be, and they may never go back to that. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily accurate, because as I mentioned, that could all change in November. It could all change in 3 years. It would certainly be different if Gavin Newsom is president. Do any of these criticisms still hold if Gavin Newsom is the next president of the United States? It doesn't. Does it hold? I would argue that it may not necessarily even hold if Marco Rubio is the next president of the United States, because he has historically been pro-free trade, pro-NAFTA, all of the things that Canadians would appreciate. So I think really what it's done is it's given world leaders breathing room to be a little more comfortable playing the game with Trump rather than having the rules of the game dictated by Trump. Yeah.
Now, Howard Lutnick, he had some interesting comments for the Canada-China trade agreement. Why do you think this is creating some tension in Washington or reaction?
It is. So before I get to his comments, there is an incredible amount of, or lack of, message discipline coming out of the White House. And that is incredibly frustrating, because if we're trying to get a feel for what the Americans actually think, well, right after the deal with China, Trump said, good for Mark Carney, that's what he was elected to do. Okay, so not viewed by the Americans as a negative? Well, I don't know. And then now we have Lutnick making an argument that it is negative and pushing back. I think probably some of the realization that when it comes to EVs, if they're coming from China, they're not coming from the United States. That potentially hurts the U.S. auto market, although it's not a massively significant number of electric vehicles, I think, to really make a huge dent. So I think where Lutnick's comments are coming from is potentially a nervousness that there could actually be a hard pivot to China. That's obviously negative economically, but I think the bigger issue is it's negative geopolitically, because that is the last thing that the Trump administration ideally wants to do, is push the middle powers to the other great power, being China, who, for reasons I don't need to list here, are not the preferred option if all things were equal.
And back at home, Pierre Poilievre yesterday reacted to Mark Carney's speech. And I mean, he's usually a pretty tough critic of Carney, but he didn't have much negative to say about the speech. It was more so, what are we going to get from this? What is the next step? So what next do you think that Mark Carney needs to be doing to follow through with his speech, to keep Canadians happy, and to continue to bring the economy up?
Well, I think he has to communicate what this ethos of the world as it is, not as we want it to be, means. How I view this is we are going to tolerate things that we otherwise wouldn't tolerate. And that has to be clearly communicated to Canadians so that they understand what it means. I'll give you an example. The trade mission to India, one of the largest economies in the world, totally understand we want to increase trade ties with India. However, the previous Liberal government accused the Indian government of hiring a hitman to kill a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil. Are we comfortable turning a blind eye to that very serious allegation? I don't know. Are we comfortable turning a blind eye to the fact that Uyghurs in China have been rounded up upwards of 1 million historically, put in concentration camps? Are we comfortable with the continued erosion of Hong Kong? Would we be comfortable if China invaded Taiwan? How do we handle what we tolerate and what we don't? I think that is what has to happen next in terms of taking what felt like a great speech into something more concrete.
Well, David, thank you so much for breaking that down. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Stay with us. We'll have more of today's top national and international headlines right after the break. We'll be right back. Canadian former Olympic snowboarder Ryan Wedding, now accused of becoming an international drug kingpin, is in police custody. Wedding, who once competed on the world stage as an elite athlete, is now alleged to have been running a multi-billion-dollar drug trafficking operation. He had been listed on the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list and was reportedly under the protection of Mexico's notorious Sinaloa cartel prior to his arrest. The FBI first publicly identified Wedding as a suspect in a sweeping indictment released in October 2024. U.S. authorities allege that he was the mastermind behind a vast drug smuggling network that moved narcotics from Colombia through Mexico and into the United States and Canada.
Today we are here because of President Trump's incredible leadership and commitment to supporting law enforcement across the country and around the world. We are here today to announce another record historic achievement because of law enforcement partnerships across America and across the globe come together to fight crime in all corners of the earth. Today, we are announcing a capture of another FBI's most wanted top 10 fugitive, Ryan Wedding. That makes 6 top 10 FBI captures in 1 year alone. To put that in perspective, that's 2 more than the entirety of the prior administration. And none of this would be possible without the tremendous leadership of Attorney General Pam Bondi and the Department of Justice and our partners and prosecutors at the United States Attorney's Office here in LA and our Los Angeles field office. Here you'll see many of our brave partners, including the Commissioner of the RCMP, Chief of Police and LAPD, our LA field office, ADEC, along with our partners from DEA and CBP and more. This is what a united front looks like. And just to tell you how bad of a guy Ryan Wedding is, he went from an Olympic snowboarder to the largest narco trafficker in modern times. He is the modern-day El Chapo. He is the modern-day Pablo Escobar. And he thought he could evade justice. But these brave men and women put together a prosecution package, put together an investigative package, put together an operation strategy, and here we are today, bringing him to justice for trafficking hundreds of kilos of cocaine and also for the murder of innocent civilians.
Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen says NATO allies support maintaining a permanent presence in the Arctic, including in areas around Greenland. Her comments come after U.S. President Donald Trump claimed a framework deal had been reached that he says addresses his demands related to Arctic security and Greenland. Frederiksen emphasized that NATO's focus is on stability and collective defense in the high north, as the region grows in strategic importance amid increased global competition. Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, has become a central focus of these discussions.
We have asked NATO to be more present in the Arctic region, I think everybody in NATO agrees about that, the Arctic states, but also other member states, that we need a permanent presence from NATO in the Arctic region, including around Greenland. You're asking about red lines. We have them. Of course, I think it's clear for everybody that we are a sovereign state, and we cannot negotiate about that because it's a part of the very basic democratic values. But of course, we can discuss with the US how we can strengthen our common cooperation on security in the Arctic region.
Greenland's Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen insisted that the island's sovereignty is non-negotiable.
As I said, we are ready to discuss a lot of things, and we are ready to negotiate a better partnership and so on. But sovereignty is a red line. Our integrity and our borders and international law is definitely a red line that we don't want anyone to cross, and I don't think that is strange at all. But a great partnership, a strong partnership, mutual respect, and in the frame we already have, both in NATO and in the defense agreement with the United States and the Kingdom of Denmark, we are able to do a lot more. So let's discuss that in a respectful way, and I think our partnership can be much stronger.
And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky sharply criticized Europe's response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, arguing that the continent has been too slow, too divided, and ultimately insufficient in confronting Moscow's aggression. Speaking to an international audience, Zelensky said Europe failed to respond with the urgency and unity required when Russia launched its full-scale invasion nearly 4 years ago. He added that those shortcomings continue to embolden the Kremlin, not only in Ukraine, but in its broader pattern of international aggression.
I've said it before and I'll repeat it again. Europe needs united armed forces that can truly defend Europe. Today, Europe relies only on the belief that if danger comes, NATO will act. But no one has really seen the alliance in action. If Putin decides to take Lithuania or strike Poland, who will respond? Europe needs to know how to defend itself. And if you send 30 or 40 soldiers to Greenland, what is that for?
Before boarding Air Force One from Davos, U.S. President Donald Trump said that he had a good meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and believes both Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin want to make a deal to end the war in Ukraine. Trump made the comments while speaking to reporters, offering an optimistic assessment of the prospects for negotiations, even as fighting continues on the ground.
I had a good meeting, but I've had, numerous good meetings with President Zelensky, and it doesn't seem to happen. And he'll make concessions. Everybody's making concessions to get it done. Europe is going to be a part of it. It's going to be a part of it. But I have an ability to get things done like this, and we'll see if I can get it done. I mean, it would never have gotten done. I thought Putin wanted the whole thing. Maybe he does, but he's not going to be going there unless we don't make a deal. And what's happened here is there were times when Putin didn't want to make a deal, times when Zelensky didn't want to make a deal, and it was like opposite times. Now I think they both want to make a deal, but we'll find out.
This comes as President Volodymyr Zelensky says officials from Ukraine, Russia, and the United States will hold trilateral meetings for the first time on Friday and Saturday as the U.S. continues to push for an end to Russia's war on Ukraine. And federal immigration agents in Minnesota have sparked outrage after detaining a 5-year-old boy along with his father as part of an enforcement operation in the Minneapolis suburbs of Columbia Heights. The preschooler was taken into custody by U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement after arriving home from school earlier this week. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance was asked about the arrest and said that ICE was targeting the child's father and acted to ensure the child's safety, disputing allegations that the agency was targeting the boy.
Vice President Vance, a local school district here is alleging ICE agents detaining a 5-year-old after preschool on Tuesday. We've also seen multiple American citizens detained by ICE or harassed by ICE in the last 6 weeks. Are you proud of how your administration is conducting this immigration crackdown here in Minnesota right now?
Well, I'm proud of the fact that we're standing behind law enforcement, and I'm proud of the fact that we're enforcing the country's laws. But, you asked a question about this 5-year-old kid. I actually saw this terrible story while I was coming to Minneapolis. We just left Toledo, Ohio this morning for an economic messaging event. And I see this story, and I'm a father of a 5-year-old, actually, a 5-year-old little boy. And I think to myself, oh my God, this is terrible. How did we arrest a 5-year-old? Well, I do a little bit more follow-up research. And what I find is that the 5-year-old was not arrested, that his dad was an illegal alien. And then when they went to arrest his illegal alien father, the father ran. So the story is that ICE detained a 5-year-old. Well, what are they supposed to do? Are they supposed to let a 5-year-old child freeze to death? Are they not supposed to arrest an illegal alien in the United States of America? If the argument is that you can't arrest people who have violated our laws because they have children, then every single parent is going to be completely given immunity from ever being the subject of law enforcement. That doesn't make any sense. No one thinks that makes any sense.
In Minneapolis, Mayor Jacob Frey accused immigration officials of racial profiling.
Peace is not spraying irritants and chemicals at peaceful protesters. It's not detaining a 5-year-old. It's not dragging a pregnant woman through the streets. You achieve peace by working directly with communities. You lower crime by strategically going after people that have committed it. The vice president said he would love to be able to send some of these agents home. There's no disagreement there. We've been encouraging that for weeks. What's changed is the response that we're seeing. What's changed is that we have 3,000 plus ICE agents and border control that are on our streets without a clear plan. What's changed is we've got this huge influx of what feels like an occupation in a city in the upper Midwest. And what's changed is that they are arresting United States citizens. They are detaining people that have done nothing wrong. They're going after people exclusively based on the fact that they look like they're Somali or they look like they are Latino, and no reason beyond that. What we are seeing is this is more about political retaliation. This is more about tragically terrorizing people than it is about safety, than it is even about immigration.
Just an hour after the doors opened Thursday at a community center west of Edmonton, staff were already checking to make sure that the crowd hadn't exceeded the building's 650-person fire capacity. And inside the hall, hundreds of Albertans lined up to sign a petition calling for a vote on whether Alberta should separate from Canada. The petition was officially approved by Alberta's chief electoral officer nearly 3 weeks ago, allowing organizers to begin collecting signatures required to trigger a referendum.
Alberta leaving Confederation, listen, Alberta didn't turn right. Canada went left. That's the issue. And the alienation and the abuse, the federal politicians, they actually think that they can do as they please and that no one will say anything. Well, maybe that's true out in Quebec and Ontario. I'm not sure. But here in Alberta, we're a different breed. We're a different culture. We're not accustomed to sitting on our thumbs and twiddling them, We're accustomed to getting things done. The question I have is, how much abuse can you put up with? That's the message of Albertans. We're so weary of being abused. The story of Cinderella? It's a beautiful story because she escaped. That's what's going to happen here.
Well, obviously we came here to sign because we want Alberta to be independent, to finally have its say as to how we move forward with our economy and make us strong again. And I truly believe that Alberta could be one of the richest countries in the world if left alone. I've always been proud to be a Canadian. I love to be a Canadian. But I don't believe that I can stay a part of Canada anymore.
City officials in Calgary say they have now laid out plans to finish replacing its old and fragile water main. The work is expected to be done in December. Construction crews are set to begin preparing sites in 3 areas of the city ahead of replacing the troubled Bears Paw South feeder main. The vital water line has ruptured twice over the past 18 months, forcing Calgarians to conserve water. The project will add a steel pipe of the same size parallel to the existing line that will eventually put its older sibling out of commission. The main supplies around 60% of the city's treated water. Now it's time for our weekly energy update with Dan McTeague, president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. All yours, Dan.
Well, Teresa, good to see you again. Last week, as we're approaching it very quickly of January, and boy, is it getting cold out there. With this weather, it's clear that by now, some of the energy traders have sort of figured out, hey, cold weather, you use more diesel, you use more natural gas, you use more propane, depending where you are, you use more energy, bottom line. So they finally clued into the fact that there is a very deep freeze coming, the likes of which we haven't seen in a decade. So I guess it serves two purposes. One, it wakes up the market to the reality of higher energy prices. But it also seems to be, an early time for our climate friends to go suddenly dormant. We haven't heard anything from them. In fact, I was driving a little early this morning, didn't see too many EVs on the road. I wonder why. Because they're not really suited for this kind of weather, which tends to be the rule, not the exception in Canada. Although the past 10 years have seen something of an aberration. But winter's back, and Canadian winters are about to smack us really hard. Now, that's probably good news if you're a ski resort or you happen to be one of those resorts out there that relies on this kind of cold weather. But make no mistake, it's going to continue to push up diesel prices, which, as I mentioned last week, would be going up anywhere from 5 to 7 cents a liter. That happened, and it's going to happen again this week. As early as Sunday, we can expect about a 4-cent increase in diesel prices, and right across Canada. It looks like with oil making it a bit of a recovery today, having dropped back a little bit yesterday, we could be pushing towards $62, $63 barrel oil. And what that really means, with a continued relative weakness in the Canadian dollar, is that we are looking at a net 4-cent increase across Canada this week to next week. So our average prices a week or two ago were about $1.21, $1.22. They're a lot closer to $1.30, $1.31. So we're now starting to see reality slip back into the markets. Another factor that I was glad to see the Canadian Taxpayers Federation catch up on, but something I'd done interviews with and have been talking about for 5 years, the Clean Fuel Standard, the second carbon tax. Yes, we seem to have forgotten that. Oh, the federal Liberals got rid of the consumer carbon tax because they knew it was damn well damaging to the economy. Well, guess what? We have a second carbon tax, and it's about 7 cents a liter for gasoline, currently about 9 cents for diesel. That will head up to 20 cents a liter, not 17, 20 cents a liter. Reduce the GDP of this country, add about $1,000 to the cost for the average family, because not only does the Clean Fuel Standard really deal with gasoline and diesel, it's likely to meander over into natural gas and other products. But it does mean that there will be a continued upward push escalator on energy prices, which in turn reduces affordability, which in turn gives us even more reason to be concerned about, prices for just about everything, including what we see at the grocery checkout. It's almost Groundhog Day for me because I keep coming back to this every few years and people treat it as if it's something new. Glad to see CTV and other media finally clued into this ripoff, which basically is to act as no more than a weather tax. But if CO2 is such a big problem and people think that we have to, beat ourselves up as we to create new technologies that don't exist to reduce not pollutants, but CO2. CO2 is not a pollutant. If we're a pollutant, I'd ask everybody to stop exhaling. But I digress. The reality is that for many of us, it's amazing how quickly we forget that these net zero policies are at the heart of why Canadians are paying so much, not just in terms of fuel and cost of living, but a weak Canadian dollar. When it takes 138 pennies to buy US dollar, that adds about 21 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. Imagine what it's doing to every other product that we consume, whether it is made in Canada or not, when you have such a weak dollar. It really reduces, it actually destroys our purchase power. But of course, you're not going to hear that anywhere else because it's an inconvenient truth that after 10 years of going down this net zero rabbit hole, which has seen us block pipelines, which has seen us destroy any type of investment coming into Canada in our number one export sector, that's oil and gas, whether, again, we like it or not, When we put EV mandates that no one wants, of course, I'm sure that people like to buy their cheap Chinese vehicles that are going to be coming in because Mark Carney had his elbows up and doesn't like the man south of the border, so he wants to bring in a country that uses these vehicles not just for spying, but dumping and effectively destroying the auto sector in Ontario and likely in Canada. That's likely to lead to an even greater strain on the traded side, but there's other factors here that go with net zero, including, restrictions, caps on emissions, hydro, ensuring that your hydro and your energy production is clear. There's not the one carbon tax we got rid of, the consumer carbon tax, the second carbon tax, the clean fuel standard, and the third carbon tax, the industrial carbon tax. So, or something referred to as OBPS, output-based pricing system. I'm not going to get into the technical details of all this, but you get an illustration of just how wrong-headed we were to have embraced on the Paris Accord the idea that we could go down this net zero position and have not only a prime minister who pushed it, but a second prime minister who's profited from it. Now, I'm not one to take shots at people because that's not my interest, but it seems to me that when you're attacking the United States and you're not happy with the guy south of the border, the company you work for just decided before you became prime minister to back up and go to the United States. Brookfield packed up its bags in Canada and heave-hoed it down to the United States. So we may not like the Americans. We may not like the fact that 80% of our economy is intertwined with the United States, but you can't escape reality. And rather than spending 4 days trying to play footsies with a autocratic regime that has interfered in our politics, that has thought nothing of political ransoms to get a hold of Canadians, like the two Michaels, that has a terrible record on human rights and on environment. We should be spending the 4 days sitting down and negotiating sector by sector with the United States. But that's, of course, something that the philosophy of the new cult, the Liberal Party, will not allow. Now, I served 18 years as a Liberal member of Parliament, so I know this is not the same Liberal Party as it was back then. Nevertheless, all this really says one thing, Teresa. Get ready for higher prices this next week. And from now, look for prices to going up generally over the next, whether you're in BC or in Atlantic Canada, look for that 4 to 7 cent increase for both gasoline and diesel as we proceed in the final week of January.
Thanks for that, Dan. Montreal filmmaker Alison McAlpine has earned an Oscar nomination for Best Documentary Short Film for her work, Perfectly a Strangeness. The nomination puts McAlpine among a select group of Canadian filmmakers competing at this year's Academy Awards, bringing international attention to Montreal's vibrant film community.
Yeah, we were watching together, nervous together, and we jumped high when we heard the news. I don't think my film is strange, but it's not journalistic American style, which most of the films in the Oscars are, which is fine. It's just not my aesthetic. So it's such a gift, but it's not. It's the out of the box film, and so it was it was an amazing surprise. And basically, the story is. 3 donkeys are in an unnamed desert, and they discover an abandoned astronomical observatory and the universe. And it's an exploration, really, of what a story can be. There's no dialogue. The sound is as important as the visuals in the film.
I'm Teresa Skubic. Have a great weekend, Canada.